Well, hello, welcome. We're here to talk about how the pandemic has undoubtedly impacted the cybersecurity industry. John and Steve, I'd like to begin by asking you both, how have companies been faring at this time with the pandemic influencing the high number of cybersecurity incidents? John, would you like to begin?
Sure, Dave, I'd be happy to begin. First, let me set a little bit of context. In the Center for Internet Security organization, we provide security support monitoring for U.S. state and local government organizations, and that's our primary focus in one part of the organization. With regard to the state and local organizations, what we've seen is sort of a mix. In some respects, we've seen an increase in what I would call relatively routine types of phishing, credential harvesting type attempts. At the same time, the volume of what I'll call more sophisticated attacks hasn't really changed dramatically. What we've seen is a little bit of difficulty on the part of some organizations on trying to deal with the increase in sort of the routine attacks, and with many of the organizations having their employees work from home, that's been a little bit of a challenge for them in terms of being able to respond quickly, et cetera. But what I've seen is that in general they've done a pretty good job. I think speaking more broadly, because part of our mission is to really provide support and best practices to the broader, global cybersecurity community. What we've seen is there's been a much more focused attention on how to provide security in a virtual environment. So work from home environment, what are the best practices? What are the tools? And so we and other organizations have been emphasizing that to help organizations through this transition. So that's what I would provide as an initial input, Dave.
Yeah, and hey, Dave, just adding on to that, very, very much in the same light, we've seen that cyber criminals have taken advantage of the topic of COVID-19 and the pandemic as a key way to accelerate their ability to phish individuals, both with the health crisis itself, but also tangential topics, things like financial stimulus. We've had to remind consumers and customers to make sure that they're only going to reputable websites. If you're looking for information about the stimulus, go to irs.gov or ssa.gov. Don't trust an email that comes into your inbox. We've also seen on the enterprise side with the shift to work from home that organizations have had to really extend their IT infrastructure into the house. So they're now relying on every employee to really be a member of the IT team to make sure that their home routers are up to date, running the latest firmware. Some organizations that don't have company or organization issued laptops have had to rely on things like home PCs. So making sure that the right security defense capabilities there is up to date has been key. And then really changing the way that we work. The way that I think about it is working remotely. We're all working on this giant untrusted network. It's called the internet. And we've had to rely on technologies to do that safely and securely. But, as John said, we've done a really nice job as a country, as industries, in successfully keeping the country running. And most businesses are quite effective at working remotely and staying safe.
Well, it does sound like the key thing here is that employees are now acting as ersatz IT people, and perhaps that is how companies can stay ahead of the game. But Steve, let's begin with you. Let's see if we can elaborate on how companies can keep ahead of the cybersecurity curve, and talk a little bit about maybe the biggest issue that's looming.
So one of the biggest issues for organizations is there are targeted threats that are getting much more sophisticated. So while there's still a sea of general malware and kind of commodity threats that is going after $100 of ransomware payments and things of that nature. What I'm really concerned about for my customers that are on the enterprise side is having those sophisticated actors doing a targeted attack where the actors are using the same technologies that the whole tech industry is using to make their attacks more lethal. If you think about the barrier to entry for some of the technologies that we're talking about at this conference, things like artificial intelligence, it's so easy to use for a wide range of topics that it's not just the defenders using the technology, it's also the adversaries. So like as an example, AI is very good for classification problems. We use it in cybersecurity defense for, is this malware or is this benign or is this malicious activity? A cyber criminal can say, which of my victims are going to be most likely to be easy to breach, and then focus an attack there, or doing things like automating phishing so they can get much higher efficacy on being able to click on phishing emails. So it's really the next generation of the threat landscape that's keeping me up.
John?
So, if I could piggyback on, I think, Steve's comments, I'd offer a couple of observations. First, in his most recent comment about artificial intelligence, I agree that AI and other technologies are going to change the landscape. And in some cases, it's positive for those that are trying to defend, because artificial intelligence, as it is more fully embedded into defensive tools, are going to let us anticipate threats that in the past really had to be done by human intervention. But as he mentioned, the adversaries, as they start to take advantage of artificial intelligence, going to make it much more difficult to be able to defend. So I wholeheartedly agree that the technology landscape is one that organizations need to pay a lot of attention to and see how they can best leverage and best protect from. The second point that I would make, back to the original note, was I think that as organizations move more virtually, they need to fairly aggressively find out how they're going to provide the protection for the workforce. I don't think it's going to be adequate to, Dave, as you suggested in your question, that all the employees become their own IT people. I think that's probably not that may be the situation that organizations found themselves in on day one, but I think long term that's not going to be the right solution. You just cannot assume that they're going to have the right expertise and the right discipline and hygiene. So I think techniques like using virtual machines, using VPNs, using before you connect, we're going to check your system, and if your system doesn't have antivirus and up-to-date patches, et cetera, we're not going to let you connect to the network. I think we're going to need to move in those types of directions. And then, provide, the appropriate training to be able to look at, and to recognize all of these attacks, because it used to be within the enterprise you could catch them. And now it's going to be a little bit more difficult in a highly distributed environment. But I think many organizations are responding quite quickly. And fortunately, the technologies that we have allow us to do this. It's not going to solve every problem, but I think we can tamp down a lot of the risk fairly quickly.
Okay, so as we wrap up, John and Steve, let's see if we can do one final question, something with regards to upper management and leadership, the boardroom and CEOs. What has been or could be their roles at the top while their employees are working from home in however many dozens or hundreds of locations? What is their responsibility, or what can their insight be from their perspective on the outside as leaders?
Sure, I can go ahead and kick us off, Dave. So, one of the things from the CEO seat, from the boardroom, is to have a better appreciation of the science of risk. So understand what their security organization is going through to protect their environment, and understanding that there's a wide range of risks, things that happen frequently that are low impact to those catastrophic events. I think even if we use the global pandemic as an analogy for what we could see in the cyber world, you know, the risk that the world had a global pandemic really wasn't that unusual. Like it should have been expected that within the 40 or 50 years, the probability of having a major event like that was actually fairly high. Similarly, in the cyber world, when you're looking at your organization, understand that we do need to be prepared for those larger cyber events. I'd assert we really haven't seen one at scale. We've had wake up calls. We've had the WannaCries from 2017, and we've had other vulnerabilities that we've had to deal with. But really dealing with a true cyber pandemic has something we haven't been tested with, and we do need to prepare for that, just like we need to continue to prepare for health pandemics moving forward.
John?
So Dave, I would pile on to Steve's comments. So I think that boards and CEOs ought to be looking at, the term I would use is enterprise level risk, and cyber as a key component of that risk. And they need to do it in a very formal and structured way. And it's not trivial, but I think as Steve said, you need to start looking at various scenarios, and scenarios of pandemic, scenarios of a potential outage, scenarios of a cyber attack, and what the impact is on your business, and then to protect against that, to determine what needs to be done to be able to provide adequate protection. I think in parallel, I think it's really important. We continue to see that most organizations, as they recover from an attack, we find that time and time again, it's really the lack of fundamental cyber hygiene. It's the basics, it's the blocking and tackle. What's on your network? Do you have the right patches? Do you have authentication, et cetera? And so I think that for boards, trying to identify what's the regime that we in the Center for Internet Security have a set of controls. We've now put them in a phased implementation approach that we recommend, but there's other regimes as well. To say you really need to set the expectation that we're going to provide basic hygiene, because without that, you're really sort of wide open. And as we've seen in organization after organization, you're subject to whatever becomes the attack that happens to you, and then unfortunately you have the consequences to deal with.
Well, John and Steve, those are major insights, and I thank you very much. You are on the front line of cybersecurity, and you've offered gems of wisdom for people to take to their team. So thank you again, and everybody stay cybersecurity safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, John.